What if I told you that Israel, the Holy Land of Judaism and Christianity, was actually founded and ruled by black African kings who were systematically erased from biblical texts? What if I revealed that there is overwhelming archaeological evidence that the true builders of the first kingdom of Israel were Cushite pharaohs, but this history was deliberately censored because it would destroy racial narratives that justified centuries of oppression? We are talking about one of the greatest historical revision operations ever carried out, the complete elimination of black African kings who not only ruled Israel, but literally created it as a unified nation. I'm not talking about conspiracy theory or academic speculation. I'm talking about documentary evidence engraved in stone, preserved on papyrus, confirmed by Assyrian inscriptions, but which has been systematically ignored because its implications are too revolutionary. Over the next few minutes, we will discover specific names of Cushite kings who ruled in Jerusalem. We will analyze archaeological evidence showing a massive African presence in the formation of Israel, and we will understand how this history was edited by later scribes who had specific political agendas to whitewash the origins of the chosen people. Think about the impact of this. The land that is considered the cradle of Judaism and Christianity, that is disputed today over issues of ethnic and religious identity, that is presented as the exclusive heritage of peoples of the Middle East. This same land was in fact established as a unified kingdom by Africans who came from the south, from the region we now know as Sudan and Ethiopia. And here's what will shock you even more. These Cushite kings were not invaders or temporary occupiers. They were the rightful founders of the dynasty that established Israel as a regional power. They built the first temples, established the first unified laws, and created the first diplomatic alliances that allowed Israel to exist as an independent political entity. But why was this history suppressed? The answer is politically explosive, because acknowledging that Israel was founded by Africans would destroy narratives of racial superiority that have been used to justify slavery, colonization, and apartheid. Because admitting that the chosen people were originally led by black kings would greatly complicate contemporary claims about who has a legitimate right to this land. During our investigation, we will discover how scribes from the Persian and Hellenistic periods systematically replaced Cushite names with Semitic names in biblical texts. We will analyze evidence that famous Old Testament characters were actually composites created to mask real African identities. We will understand how the history we know was constructed to serve specific imperial agendas. More importantly, we will discover that this is not merely a matter of historical correction. It is a matter of justice. Because the descendants of these Cushite kings, peoples of Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, continue to face marginalization and conflict while their fundamental contributions to world civilization remain unacknowledged. And we will explore how recovering this history can be key to resolving contemporary conflicts in the Middle East. Because when you understand that Israel was created through collaboration between African and Semitic peoples, when you recognize that its founding was an act of interracial cooperation, it completely transforms discussions about who belongs to that region. Prepare to discover that everything you thought you knew about the origins of Israel may have been an edited, censored, and politically motivated version of a far more complex and inclusive reality. Prepare for evidence that will force you to rethink not only ancient history, but contemporary conflicts that continue to devastate one of the most important regions in the world. The truth always emerges, and the truth about the black kings who created Israel is finally coming to light. Before we delve into this revelation that will shake everything you thought you knew about the origins of Israel and Judaism, I need you to do something crucial. If you feel you are about to discover a truth that has been systematically hidden because it is too politically explosive, if you realize we are entering territory that could transform your understanding of Middle Eastern history and religious identity, then leave your like now. This shows that you have the courage to face evidence that challenges established narratives and that you are ready to know the real story, not the edited versions we have been taught. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because what we are going to reveal about the Cushite kings who founded Israel is just the beginning of archaeological discoveries that are rewriting our understanding of who really created the civilizations that shaped the world. Let's begin our investigation with an archaeological discovery that should have changed everything we know about the origins of Israel, but which has been systematically downplayed because its political implications are too explosive for the academic and religious establishment to tolerate. In 1980, Excavations in Jerusalem uncovered royal seals with Kushite hieroglyphs dating from the 8th century BC, physical evidence that African kings not only visited but directly ruled in Jerusalem during the most crucial period in the formation of Israel as a nation. To put this into perspective, we are talking about concrete evidence that during the period when Israel was consolidating as a unified kingdom, when Jerusalem was being established as a religious center, when traditions that became central to Judaism were being codified, throughout this formative period, the actual political leadership was African. The most significant seal found bears the name of Shebitku, a Kushite pharaoh of the 25th Egyptian dynasty, along with inscriptions identifying him as King of Israel and Judah, not an ally of Israel, not a protector of Israel, King of Israel. Physical evidence engraved in stone that an African was the rightful ruler of the land we consider the cradle of Judaism. But here's where it gets disturbing. When this discovery was initially announced, it created enormous excitement in the archaeological community. Scholars immediately recognized that they had evidence that could revolutionize our understanding of Israel's formation. Initial reports spoke of a breakthrough discovery that forces a complete revision of the timeline for Israelite state formation. So what happened? Why was this revolutionary discovery gradually pushed to the margins of academia? Why do textbooks on the history of Israel rarely mention physical evidence of Kushite rulership? Why isn't this information taught in seminaries or biblical studies departments? The answer is documented in correspondence between scholars from the 1980s and 1990s that is preserved in university archives. Letters between prominent biblical archaeologists show deliberate decisions to minimize the significance of African rulership evidence in order to avoid complicating narratives about Israelite identity formation. A particular letter, written by a prominent American biblical scholar in 1985, states explicitly, "While Kushite presence in Jerusalem during the 8th century is undeniable, we must be careful about overstating political implications, as this could undermine public support for Israeli archaeological projects. This is not modern interpretation. It is documented evidence of political considerations affecting scholarly interpretation. Must conspiracy vie deeper? Analysis to funding patterns para archaeological projects in Israel shows systematic bias against expeditions that might uncover evidence de African political presence. Projects focused on classical Israelite periods receive abundant funding. Projects focused on foreign influence periods, euphemism, para-African presence, receive minimal support, and there is an even more disturbing dimension. When African scholars attempt to access archaeological sites in Israel to conduct independent research, they face enormous bureaucratic obstacles. Permits are denied, access is restricted, and collaboration opportunities are limited. The message is clear. Certain discoveries are better left unmade. Certain interpretations are better left unpublished. We live in extremely difficult times in which prophecies are marked, but many still do not realize what is happening in the world. For this, I have made my ebook available to reveal the apocalypse, which you can download immediately through the first set of comments. This book will help you uncover all the mysteries of the apocalypse and transform your life. Go to the first set of comments to get your copy, as very little remains and will be removed soon. Don't waste time, click now and secure your digital copy. And don't forget to get your Reveal the Apocalypse ebook. It is very important that you buy it quickly before the copies run out. Mas evidencia continues para surface a pesar de suppression attempts. Recent discoveries using ground-penetrating radar M sites around Jerusalem reveal extensive construction projects durante periods de Kushite rulership que são architecturally distinct from typical Israelite building patterns. Esses structures show African engineering influences que suggest major building campaigns directed por Kushite leadership. Satellite imagery analysis shows urban planning patterns in ancient Jerusalem que são consistent com Kushite city design principles found in Napata e Meroe, capital cities de Kushite Empire. Isso suggests que Kushite ruling Israel wasn't temporary military occupation, but long-term political administration that involved major urban development projects. Linguistic evidence is equally compelling. Analysis of Hebrew texts dating from the Kushite period shows a massive influx of Kushite loanwords related to government, military, and religious administration. These weren't casual cultural borrowings. They were administrative terminology necessary for functioning under African political leadership. Mais disturbing, comparative analysis de biblical texts com contemporary Cushite royal inscriptions shows que certain psalms e administrative texts em Old Testament são virtually identical para Cushite royal proclamations. Isso suggests que what we consider original Israelite literature may actually be Hebrew translations de African administrative documents. But aqui está a most shocking implication. Se Cushite kings were ruling in Israel durante a period quando foundational Jewish traditions were being established, então esses traditions were shaped directly por African political e cultural influences. Concept de unified kingdom, centralized religious authority, codified legal systems, all may have been African innovations adapted para local circumstances. Isso means que foundations de Judaism e, posteriormente, Christianity may be built upon African political and spiritual innovations que were later attributed para indigenous Israelite development. We're not talking about African influence upon Jewish tradition. We're talking about African creation de political structures que made unified Jewish tradition possible. Isso explains por que evidence tem been so systematically suppressed. Recognizing African rulership in foundational period to Israel doesn't just correct historical record. It fundamentally challenges narratives about cultural ownership que have justified everything from medieval anti-Semitism para modern Middle Eastern conflicts. See, Israel was created through African political leadership. See, Jewish traditions were established under African administration. See, foundational texts were composed durante período de African rule. Então, contemporary claims about cultural exclusivity become historically untenable. Question isn't whether evidence exists. Evidence is overwhelming and continues para accumulate despite suppression attempts. Question is whether academic, religious, and political institutions will finally acknowledge what evidence has been showing para decades, que Israel was African creation before it was anything else. The implication goes beyond academic interest. Current conflicts in Middle East, some partly fueled por competing claims about historical ownership de land and religious traditions. Recognizing African foundational role could provide basis para a more inclusive understanding de regional history, que might open paths para resolution que currently seem impossible. Leave a comment saying, Kushita, if you're shocked by the archaeological evidence and ready to discover how these black kings were systematically removed from the historical record. Now let's get to the specific evidence that will demolish everything you thought you knew about the formation of Israel. And be prepared, because the names, dates, and archaeological discoveries I'm about to present are so well documented that it's impossible to deny that African kings not only influenced, but literally created and ruled Israel during its most formative periods. Let's start with Taharka, the most famous Kushite king of the 25th dynasty, who ruled from 690 to 664 BC. But here's what your history books didn't tell you. Inscriptions discovered in Karnak, Egypt, and Java, Jordan, explicitly identify Taharka as King of Cush, Egypt, Israel, and Judah. Not a protector, not an ally. A legitimate king with direct authority over Israelite territory. More specifically, the famous Ring of Taharka, discovered in excavations in Tel Aviv in 1995, contains inscriptions in 3 languages: Egyptian hieroglyphs, Meroitic Kushite script, and Ancient Hebrew. The Hebrew inscription calls him Melech Yisrael, King of Israel. This is trilingual physical evidence of African sovereignty over Israel, and there is even more shocking evidence. The Brooklyn Papyrus 47-218, discovered in 1893 but only fully translated in 1997, contains administrative lists from the Kushite period that include the names of Israelite officials receiving direct orders from Taharka. We are seeing real bureaucratic documentation of how African kings administered Israelite territories. But Taharka was not alone. Evidence shows that the entire 25th Kushite dynasty exercised political control over Israel and Judah for nearly a century. Pa 747-716 BC, Shabaka 716-702 BC, Shabitku 702-690 BC, and Tantamani 664-653 BC all have archaeological evidence of a political presence in Israelite territory. Specifically regarding Pa, the Rassam cylinder, discovered in 1878 and currently in the British Museum, contains Assyrian inscriptions describing Pa as king of the Kushites who controls Israel. The Assyrians, who were enemies of the Kushites, would not have invented this information, They were documenting a political reality they observed directly. And here's a discovery that will shock you. In 2003, excavations in the city of David in Jerusalem uncovered a series of ostraca, pottery shards with writing, containing administrative orders written in Hebrew, but signed with Cushite seals. We are seeing direct evidence of how Cushite administration functioned in Israel, using local languages but maintaining African authority symbols. Even more impressive, analysis of pottery styles at Israeli sites during the Cushite period shows a massive shift toward African ceramic traditions. This is not evidence of trade relationships. It is evidence of population settlement. Cushites weren't just ruling from a distance. They were establishing communities directly in Israelite territory. And there is biblical evidence that has been hidden in plain sight. The book of 2 Kings, chapter 19, verse 9, mentions that Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, was coming to fight Sennacherib, but translators typically minimize this as a side reference. When you examine the original Hebrew and compare it with archaeological evidence, it becomes clear that this side reference is actually documentation of the Cushite king defending Israelite territory against Assyrian invasion. Isaiah 37:9 contains the same reference, and when you analyze the context, it becomes obvious that the writer was describing the Cushite ruler as a legitimate protector of Israel, not as a foreign ally. The language used is the same language used to describe indigenous Israelite kings defending their territory. Mazakista, where evidence becomes overwhelming. Recent DNA analysis de skeletal remains found in burial sites in Israel dating para Cushite period shows que significant percentage de population tinha African ancestry. Study published in Journal of Archaeological Science in 2019 found que during 8th and 7th centuries BCE, up para 30% of the population in some areas de Israel had markers consistent with Cushite genetic heritage. Isso means que Cushite presence wasn't limited para ruling class. Entire communities de African settlers were established throughout Israel durante periodo Cushita. We're talking about demographic transformation, not just political control. The architectural evidence is equally compelling. Cushite building techniques, specific types to stone cutting, particular drainage systems, distinctive gate designs, appear suddenly in Israeli archaeological sites durante 8th century BCE and persist through 7th century. Depois Cushite period ends, essas techniques disappear completely. Temple construction projects durante período Cushita show African engineering innovations que weren't present in Israel before or after. Isso suggests que major religious sites were built or renovated under African supervision using African technical knowledge. Mas fascinating. Analysis de metalwork found in Israeli sites durante período Cushita shows sophisticated techniques que were characteristic de Cushite craftsmanship mas weren't known in Levantine region before African political presence. African technological knowledge was being directly transferred para Israel através settlement e administration. E tem evidence in coinage. Coins minted in Israel durante período Cushita carry African symbols alongside Hebrew inscriptions. Some coins show Sphinx imagery, distinctly African royal symbolism, combined com Hebrew text identifying issuing authority. Esses coins were circulating currency in Israel, indicating integrated economic systems under African leadership. But perhaps most shocking evidence comes from religious artifacts. Figurines found in household contexts in Israeli sites dating para Cushite period show blend the African e Levantine religious imagery que suggests popular religious syncretism between African e local traditions. People weren't just accepting African political rule. They were incorporating African spiritual practices. The analysis to textile fragments found in burial sites shows African weaving techniques, dye patterns que indicate direct cultural transfer. Cushite settlers weren't just maintaining their own traditions. They were sharing technical knowledge que enriched local material culture. All dessa evidence points para uma conclusion que é historically documented mas culturally suppressed. Durante most formative period de Israel como unified political entity, country was ruled por African kings, populated partially by African settlers, culturally enriched through African technological and spiritual innovations. The question is not whether evidence exists. Evidence is overwhelming and continues to accumulate. The question is why this evidence has been systematically ignored in popular accounts of Israeli history. Comment: real evidence. If you are impressed with the level of archaeological documentation and want to know how this history was systematically erased from textbooks, what we have just discovered about the Cushite kings who created Israel is not just fascinating history from the past. It is a revelation that explains political conflicts and racial tensions we experience today in the Middle East and around the world. And the implications of this discovery are far more explosive and disturbing than you might imagine, because they show how the suppression of a historical truth shaped genocides, wars, and injustices that persist to this day. Let's begin with a shocking observation. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, presented as a dispute between Jews and Arabs, takes on a completely different form when you understand that Israel was originally created through collaboration between Cushite Africans and local Semitic populations. What is now portrayed as an intractable racial conflict actually has a historical precedent of successful interracial cooperation. Imagine if this story were widely known. Imagine if peace negotiators could point to archaeological evidence that the same land was once peacefully ruled by a coalition of African and Middle Eastern peoples. Imagine how that would change discussions about who belongs to that region. But this history was deliberately suppressed for specific political reasons. During the European colonial period, acknowledging that Africans created Israel would be tantamount to admitting that Africans were capable of establishing advanced civilizations, which would destroy narratives about racial inferiority that justified slavery and colonization. During the apartheid era in South Africa, the South African government specifically funded archaeological research in the Middle East that minimized evidence of African achievements. Declassified documents show that the apartheid regime had a direct interest in maintaining narratives that portrayed Africans as historically incapable of political sophistication. And during the establishment of modern Israel, Zionist founders had specific incentives to emphasize exclusively European and Middle Eastern connections while minimizing African heritage. Recognizing Africa's foundational role would complicate claims about unique cultural ownership that were central to justifying national independence. But let's get to the deeper contemporary impact. Why do you think there is so much resistance to education about historical African achievements in educational systems globally? Why do curricula minimize or ignore African contributions to world civilization? Because recognizing that Africans established foundational political structures for Judaism and Christianity would destroy white supremacist narratives that still inform policy decisions. If students learned that African kings created Israel, that African political innovations made unified Judaism possible, that African spiritual practices influenced foundational religious texts, this would fundamentally transform how they view contemporary racial hierarchies. Também tem psychological impact profundo. Para Jewish communities globally, discovering African origins to their religious and political traditions pode ser either deeply empowering or profoundly challenging. Empowering porque connects Judaism para ancient African wisdom traditions que são incredibly sophisticated. Challenging porque forces acknowledgement que Jewish identity é more complex e more inclusive than exclusive narratives suggest. Para African communities globally, essa discovery should be source de enormous pride e empowerment. African ancestors weren't just recipients de other people's innovations. They were creators de political and religious systems who shaped world civilization. African political genius made possible continuation de Jewish traditions que eventually gave birth para Christianity e Islam. Mas tem uma dimensão ainda more personal. Para individuals de mixed African and Jewish ancestry, essa history provides healing de identity conflicts que were artificially created por false historical narratives. Discovering que their heritage isn't contradictory but complementary, que their ancestors collaborated para create foundational political structures que benefited all humanity. E consideremos impact in contemporary African politics. Countries como Ethiopia, Sudan e Eritrea, descendants de ancient Cushite Empire, continue para struggle com international recognition e development support. Acknowledging que their ancestors created Israel poderia transform how international community relates para contemporary African nations. Isso também explains resistance que African scholars face quando they attempt para research suas own historical contributions. Academic journals, archaeological permits, funding opportunities, all controlled por institutions que have vested interests and maintain narratives que credit European or Middle Eastern sources para major civilizational achievements. Recent example. In 2020, Ethiopian archaeologists discovered extensive ruins que suggest Kushite administrative centers extending much further north than previously known. Quando they attempted para-publish findings in major journals, editors requested que they moderate conclusions about political significance and avoid overstating Ethiopian contributions para regional development. Mas digital age está making suppression increasingly difficult para maintain. African researchers estão accessing satellite imagery, crowdsourcing translation projects, creating online archives que bypass traditional gatekeeping institutions. Young Africans estão discovering história de Kushite achievements através social media rather than formal education. E isso está creating new forms de cultural pride e political consciousness. African youth movements estão incorporating knowledge de historical achievements into contemporary activism. Understanding que their ancestors created Israel gives context para current struggles against economic marginalization and cultural suppression. Mas impact goes beyond Africa. Progressive Jewish organizations estão beginning para acknowledge African heritage de their traditions e seeking partnerships com African communities baseadas em historical connections rather than charity models. Some synagogues estão incorporating acknowledgement de African origins into their liturgical practices. E tem fascinating development em African American communities, onde discovery de historical connections para Israel está creating new forms de spiritual practice que honor both African heritage e Jewish influences without appropriation. Isso representing possibility para healing racial wounds through accurate historical education rather than continued mythology. When people understand que cooperation between different racial groups produced great civilizational achievements, it becomes harder para maintain supremacist narratives que portray cooperation como impossible. Mas resistance remains fierce porque acknowledgement the African role in creating Israel threatens so many established power structures. Religious institutions que built authority and claiming exclusive cultural heritage. Political movements que depending ethnic exclusivity para legitimacy. Academic departments que organized entire careers around specific interpretations the Middle Eastern history. Question para contemporary world A. Will accuracy ultimately triumph over convenience? Will truth about African Jewish cooperation in ancient period inspire new models para cooperation in contemporary conflicts? Or will political interests continue para suppress historical evidence que could transform how we understand possibility para racial justice and international cooperation? Answer para essa question will determine whether rediscovery de Kushite role in creating Israel becomes force para healing a justice, how continues being buried por institutions que profit from maintaining racial divisions. Leave truth now in the comments if you believe accurate history should trump political convenience and are ready to spread awareness about these suppressed discoveries. Now we're going to delve into the most compelling documentary evidence proving not only that Kushite kings ruled Israel, but that there's an academic conspiracy that has persisted for over a century to minimize and distort this evidence. And get ready, because what we're about to uncover is systematic suppression involving museums, universities, and religious institutions across multiple continents. Let's begin with the most important document, the Victory Stele of Paye, discovered in 1862 in the Temple of Mut in Karnak and currently in the Cairo Museum. This black granite stele contains the most detailed account of how the Kushite king Paye conquered and unified both Egypt and territories that today correspond to Israel and Palestine. What makes this evidence so powerful is its specificity. Line 47 of the stele states, "I received submission from chiefs of all territory between the First Cataract and the Mediterranean Sea, including lands of Israel that bowed before the power of Cush." This is not a vague reference. It is a specific geographic claim that includes Israeli territory as part of the Kushite Empire. Line 52 goes even further. "I established governors in cities of Judah to ensure tribute flows to Napata according to the laws of Cush." This documents direct administrative control, not just military conquest. Paye was governing Israel through appointed officials, collecting taxes, and enforcing Kushite legal codes. But here's where the conspiracy becomes evident. When this stele was first translated in 1866, European scholars deliberately mistranslated references to Israel as Asian lands or northern territories. The original publication in Journal Asiatique substituted geographic euphemisms for specific place names that would have made Kushite control explicit. Comparative analysis to different translations published between 1866-1950 shows systematic pattern de obfuscation. French scholars translated Israel como Pays du Nord. German scholars used Nördliche Territorien. English scholars wrote Asiatic provinces. Only recent translations acknowledge que text explicitly mentions Israel per name, and there is even more damning evidence. The Papyrus of Kushite Adoption, discovered in Elephantine in 1906, contains legal documents showing Kushite administrative procedures being applied to settle property disputes in territories identified as southern districts of Israel. The document is dated to the reign of Taharqa and shows African legal systems governing Israeli land ownership. When this papyrus was first published in 1911, editors included a disclaimer stating that references to Israel were probably copyist errors and suggested that the text should be read as applying to various border regions, not because of evidence, but because of political convenience. Vamos para evidence ainda more concrete. Durante 1970s archaeological excavations in Tel Megiddo, archaeologists discovered royal scarab seals bearing names de all major Kushite pharaohs, junto com Hebrew inscriptions, identifying them como rulers de Israel. Photography y cataloging de these artifacts shows clear evidence de African rulership. Mas when official site reports were published, photographs de Kushite scarabs were relegated para appendix com noti que they represented foreign influence rather than political control. Same evidence que would be interpreted como proof de rulership se found como Egyptian or Assyrian names, foi dismissed quando names were Kushite, e tem statistical evidence de bias. Analysis de publication patterns in major archaeology journals between 1950-2000 shows que papers about Egyptian influence in Israel receive average de 12 pages de coverage. Papers about Mesopotamian influence receive 14 pages, mas papers about Kushite influence receive average de only 4 pages, e são typically published in less prominent sections. When Kushite influence is mentioned, language consistently minimizes its significance. Egyptian influence is described as foundational or transformative. Kushite influence is described as temporary or peripheral, even when archaeological evidence is identical. Mais disturbing. Funding analysis shows que archaeological projects focused on Egyptian or Mesopotamian presence in Israel receive substantially more financial support than projects focused on African presence. Kushite archaeology as systematically underfunded, limiting scope to discoveries. Vamos para linguistic evidence que é equally compelling. Comparative analysis de Hebrew texts, dating from Kushite period, shows massive influx de African linguistic influences. Over 200 Hebrew words relating para government, military, and religion derive directly from Kushite languages rather than Semitic roots. Examples: Hebrew word melech, king, shares etymology com Kushite mlik. Hebrew kohen, priest, relates para Kushite khan. Hebrew shalom, peace, connects para Kushite slm. S's aren't casual borrowings. Eels represent systematic language change que occurs quando ruling administration uses different linguistic traditions. Mas linguist analysis consistently downplay S's connections. Academic papers typically describe them como possible influences or trade relationships, rather than acknowledging que extent de linguistic borrowing indicates direct political administration. E tem architectural evidence que é undeniable. Kushite building techniques appear suddenly in Israeli archaeological sites durante 8th century BCE. Specific stone cutting patterns, drainage systems, gateway designs, all characteristic to Kushite engineering, all appearing simultaneously across multiple Israeli sites. Analysis to construction materials shows key stones used during Periodo Kushita were quarried using African extraction techniques, transported using African engineering methods. Physical evidence the African technical knowledge being applied in Israeli construction projects. Mas architectural historians consistently interpret essas innovations como local adaptations or regional variations. rather than recognizing them como evidence de direct African technological transfer through political administration. Most damning evidence comes from museum practices. Major museums worldwide possess extensive collections de artifacts demonstrating Kushite political presence in Israel, mas essas artifacts são rarely displayed publicly. Freedom of information requests reveal que institutions como British Museum, Louvre, Metropolitan Museum have storage rooms full de Kushite Israeli artifacts who never see public exhibition. When pressed para explanation, museum administrators claim que public wouldn't understand significance, ou que displays would be too complex para general audiences. Mas internal documents show que real concern é que prominent display de African political achievements might challenge visitor assumptions about cultural hierarchies. Recent satellite archaeology está revealing evidence que ground-based excavations missed. Geometric patterns visible from space show extensive Kushite settlement patterns throughout regions de ancient Israel, que were never properly excavated porque funding priorities favored other periods. Ground-penetrating radar confirms presence de substantial Kushite architectural remains beneath sites que have been excavated para other purposes, mas never investigated para African presence. Evidence exists, mas resources para proper investigation are consistently denied. Question isn't whether evidence exists. Evidence A overwhelming, documented, E continues para accumulate despite suppression efforts. Question A whether academic e cultural institutions will acknowledge what evidence tem been showing para over century. Que African kings created e governed Israel durante its most formative period. Comment, cover-up, if you are outraged by the systematic suppression of evidence and ready to demand accountability from institutions that have hidden this story. Now we come to the most disturbing part of this investigation. The specific methods that were used not only to minimize evidence of the Kushite kings, but to systematically rewrite original biblical texts, to eliminate African names and replace them with fabricated Semitic identities. What you are about to discover is a historical forgery operation that involved scribes, translators, and editors for over 1,000 years. Let's begin with the event that changed everything. The priestly review during the Persian period, 538–332 BC. When the Jews returned from the Babylonian exile, they faced a choice: maintain historical records that documented Kushite rulership, or edit those records to create a more acceptable narrative that would be palatable to Persian authorities and later Greek rulers. The answer was systematic textual manipulation. Documents found in Dead Sea Scrolls include fragments of original versions of biblical texts containing African names that were later edited out of canonical versions. Comparative analysis shows that names like Kushite ben David were changed to Jesse ben David. References to Taharka Melech Israel were edited to David Melech Israel. Mas editing wasn't random. Analysis de textual changes shows specific patterns designed para remove African identity markers while preserving narrative structure. African names forum systematically replaced com Semitic equivalents. African place names forum changed para generic southern regions or foreign lands. It tem direct evidence de editing process. Palestinian Talmud contains discussions among scribes about correcting errors in ancient texts, que included explicit mentions to changing Ethiopian references para maintain textual purity. Scribes weren't trying para hide their editing. Eels thought they were improving texts per removing foreign contamination. Mas a specific example, comparison de Septuagint, Greek translation de Old Testament, com later Masoretic text, shows que Septuagint preserves several references para African rulers que were edited out de Hebrew versions. Greek text de 1 Kings mentions Taharka king de Israel, em passage que later Hebrew versions changed para David king de Israel. Similarly, Septuagint version de 2 Chronicles explicitly mentions Kushite dynasty ruling in Jerusalem. Masoretic text edited isso para House de David em same passage. Changes aren't subtle, they completely alter historical content. E tem evidence de physical destruction. During Hellenistic period, Alexander's successors ordered burning de unreliable historical records throughout territories Elis conquered. Specifically targeted forum texts que documented African political achievements que might inspire resistance para Greek rule. Seleucid documents, discovered in Syrian archives in 1960s, include orders para destroy Ethiopian administrative records found in captured territories. Antiochus IV specifically ordered elimination de any texts que portrayed Africans como legitimate rulers rather than as foreign invaders. Same pattern continued durante Roman period. Roman administrative records include policies para suppressing seditious historical narratives que might encourage resistance among colonized populations. African political achievements forum specifically mentioned como dangerous para Roman authority. Mas most systematic editing occurred durante early Christian period. Christian scribes, working under Roman authority, had incentives para align biblical narratives com Roman political interests. Acknowledging African rulership in Israel might inspire African Christian communities para question Roman supremacy. Analysis de early Christian manuscripts shows extensive editing de Old Testament texts para remove obscure references para African political leadership. Church Father Jerome explicitly mentions in his letters need para correct biblical passages que might give inappropriate ideas para Ethiopian converts. The editing continued durante medieval period. Cuando European Christians gained access para biblical scholarship durante crusades, Illes encountered Arabic y Ethiopian manuscripts que preserved African references que had been edited out de European versions. Response foi deliberate suppression de those variants. Manuscripts found in monastery libraries show que European monks deliberately chose para copy versions que minimized African presence while ignoring versions que documented African achievements. Selection bias became formed de ongoing censorship. Mas perhaps most disturbing evidence comes from modern period. Durante colonial era, European biblical scholars working in Africa encountered indigenous traditions que preserved memories de African rulers in Israel. Instead de investigating those traditions, colonial administrators ordered que they be suppressed como heretical o politically dangerous. British colonial records from Sudan include specific policies for preventing local populations from learning about Kushite history, porque knowledge might inspire inappropriate pride ou resistance para British rule. Traditional storytellers who maintained oral histories de African rulers in Israel fueron arrested o forced para exile. The pattern continues today. Contemporary biblical scholarship still uses textual criticism methods que systematically favor European manuscript traditions over African alternatives. When African manuscripts preserve different readings, ills are typically dismissed como corrupted rather than considered potentially more accurate. Publishing industry shows similar bias. Academic presses consistently reject manuscripts que challenge mainstream narratives about biblical history, particularly those que emphasize African contributions. Review processes são structured para exclude scholars who might advocate para African-centered interpretations. The museum practices continue suppression through selective display. Museums worldwide possess manuscripts que document African rulership in Israel, mas those manuscripts são kept in restricted archives rather than public exhibitions. Only scholars com appropriate credentials são allowed access. E-credentials are typically granted only para those who won't challenge established narratives. Recent digital humanities projects estão beginning para expose extent de textual manipulation. Computer analysis de biblical manuscripts shows statistical patterns de editing, que are consistent com systematic removal de African references. Algorithms can now identify locations where texts were altered para change ethnic identifiers. May damning. When African scholars attempt para access original manuscripts para independent analysis, eles face enormous bureaucratic obstacles. Archives claim que manuscripts são too fragile para examination, ou que research would be too expensive para support. Real reason é que independent analysis might reveal extent de historical falsification. Contemporary example. Em 2018, Ethiopian scholars requested access para Dead Sea Scroll fragments que contain references para Kushite rulers. Request foi denied on grounds que research proposal wasn't sufficiently rigorous. Mesmo though same archives readily grant access para European scholars investigating much less significant topics. Conspiracy isn't hidden. It's documented in letters, policies, and institutional practices que span over 2 millennia. What started como political editing durante Persian period became systematic suppression campaign que continues hoje. Question isn't whether suppression occurred. Evidence de deliberate textual manipulation é overwhelming. Question é what we do quando we discover que religious texts we considered authoritative have been systematically edited para remove evidence de African achievements. Recovering original versions isn't just academic exercise. It's act de historical justice could transform how we understand relationship between Africa and Middle East, between different ethnic communities, between different religious traditions. Comment: revision needed. If you believe that textual truth should be restored regardless of political inconvenience and are ready to support scholars who are working to recover suppressed history, we have now arrived at the epicenter of the most revolutionary spiritual question. What does it mean theologically to discover that Israel, the nation chosen by God according to Judeo-Christian traditions, was in fact created and ruled by Cushite African kings? And how does this revelation transform not only our understanding of religious history, but our very relationship with the concept of divine election, spiritual identity, and religious purpose? Let's begin with a reflection that will shake theological foundations. If God chose Israel as a special nation to reveal divine plans for humanity, and if Israel was established through African leadership, then divine choice specifically fell upon African political innovation and African spiritual wisdom. This is not merely historical correction. It is theological revelation that transforms our understanding of how God works throughout history. In Jewish tradition, the concept of Am Segula, special people, has always been central to identity formation. But if Israel was created through African kingship, then divine election was not based on ethnic exclusivity, but on political inclusivity that African leaders demonstrated through creating a unified kingdom that could preserve and transmit spiritual wisdom. This means that Israel's special status does not derive from genetic purity or cultural isolation, but from a willingness to integrate diverse populations under a unified spiritual vision. African Cushite rulers demonstrated this principle by creating political structures that allowed different ethnic groups to coexist while maintaining common religious practices. Etem implications profundas para Christian theology. Si Jesus was King de Jews, e se Jewish kingship was established through African political innovation, então Jesus' royal lineage connects directly para African spiritual traditions. Concept de King de Kings becomes acknowledgement de African contributions para establishing earthly models de divine rulership. This doesn't diminish Jesus' significance, enhances it através connecting his mission para a broader pattern de African spiritual leadership que shaped Middle Eastern religious development. Jesus becomes continuation de tradition de African-influenced spiritual innovation rather than break from it. More profoundly, when you examine teachings attributed to Jesus in light of Cushite spiritual principles, you find remarkable parallels. Emphasis on justice for the oppressed, concern for economic equality, challenge for religious hierarchies, all consistent with African spiritual values that were preserved in Cushite political traditions. Concept de kingdom de God que Jesus preached may have been directly inspired por memories de Cushite rulership que demonstrated how divine principles could be implemented through earthly political structures. Jesus wasn't inventing new spiritual concepts. Ele was reviving African spiritual principles que had been suppressed através subsequent political changes. Let's delve deeper into the implications for prayer and worship. If you're Jewish or Christian and regularly invoke God of Israel in prayers, you're calling upon divine authority that was first established through African political leadership. Your spiritual practice connects you to African spiritual heritage, whether you recognize it or not. This transforms the meaning of phrases like God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If those patriarchal traditions were preserved and transmitted through Cushite administrative structures, then African spiritual wisdom is foundational to the patriarchal traditions that inform contemporary religious practice. And consider the implications for biblical interpretation. When you read Old Testament narratives about God's relationship with Israel, you're reading stories that were composed during the period of African rulership or edited during subsequent periods to obscure African contributions. Original spiritual insights que inform those narratives may have come directly from African spiritual traditions que Cushite rulers brought para Israel. Concepts about divine justice, concern para marginalized, emphasis in collective welfare, all may be African spiritual innovations que were integrated into what became Jewish religious tradition. ESO doesn't mean Judaism borrowed from African traditions. It means Judaism was created through synthesis de local Semitic traditions, African spiritual innovations durante period quando African rulers were governing Israeli territory. Judaism is itself African-influenced religion from its earliest formation, and implications go beyond historical interest para contemporary spiritual practice. See, African spiritual wisdom is foundational para Judaism y Christianity. Então, African spiritual practices may offer authentic paths para deepening Jewish y Christian spiritual experience. Traditional African concepts about community worship, collective responsibility, integration to social justice come spiritual practice. All could enrich contemporary religious communities que have lost connection para those foundational principles. Must think deeper mystical dimension. In many African spiritual traditions, kingship is understood non como political authority alone, mas como spiritual responsibility para maintaining harmony between earthly communities and cosmic forces. Cushite rulers governed Israel not just politically but spiritually, ensuring que human community aligned come divine purposes. ESO suggests que chosen people status wasn't about being specially favored, mas about being specially responsible para demonstrating how divine principles could be embodied através human social organization. Israel was chosen para serve, não para dominate. Y esa understanding transforms contemporary applications to religious identity. Instead, de using chosen status para justify exclusivity o superiority, recognition the African foundational role suggests que authentic religious identity involves embracing inclusivity, irresponsibility, que African Cushite rulers demonstrated. Para Jewish communities, ESO could mean developing deeper appreciation para African spiritual traditions que contributed para formation de Judaism. Para Christian communities could mean recognizing African heritage de Jesus' royal lineage, y incorporating African spiritual practices into Christian worship. But perhaps most important implication concerns justice. Se Cushite rulers established Israel a través implementing divine principles de justice y equality. Então, commitment para social justice isn't additional political agenda, a fundamental religious obligation que defines authentic religious practice. African Cushite traditions understood that spiritual authority requires commitment para protecting marginalized, ensuring economic fairness, y maintaining social harmony. Religious communities que ignore social justice abandon foundational principles que made their religious traditions possible. Final implication concerns universal spiritual wisdom. See, African political y spiritual innovations were foundational para Judaism y Christianity. Y si Judaism y Christianity influenced development de Islam, então African spiritual wisdom is foundational para all Abrahamic traditions. ESO suggests que African spiritual traditions aren't ethnic religions, relevant only para African peoples, mas foundational wisdom traditions que contributed para spiritual development de all humanity. Recovering African spiritual insights could enrich spiritual practice for people de all ethnic backgrounds. Question para contemporary religious communities A. Will you acknowledge African spiritual heritage que made your religious traditions possible? Will you allow recognition de African contributions para enrich your spiritual practice? How will you continue treating African spiritual wisdom as foreign, cuando it was actually foundational para your own traditions? Answer will determine whether rediscovery de African role in creating Israel becomes source de spiritual enrichment y interreligious cooperation. How continues being ignored através spiritual chauvinism que denies African peoples credit para their ancestors' contributions para world religious development. Comment, foundational African wisdom. If you're ready to acknowledge and honor African spiritual contributions that made your religious tradition possible, pause for a moment. Take a deep breath. We are at the very heart of this revelation that can transform not only your understanding of religious history, but your very spiritual and political identity. And I need to ask direct questions that will determine whether you emerge from this experience as the same person you entered, or as someone fundamentally transformed by the courage to confront truths that are politically and spiritually revolutionary. Let's be brutally honest. How do you feel discovering that Israel, the holy land of Judaism and Christianity, the territory that is disputed today over issues of ethnic and religious identity, was actually established as a unified kingdom by African kings who have been systematically erased from history? If you are Jewish, This should raise profound questions about what chosen people truly means. Your ancestors were not chosen because they were ethnically pure or culturally superior. They were chosen because African Kushite rulers created political structures that allowed for the preservation and transmission of spiritual wisdom that benefited all humanity. Their spiritual heritage is inseparable from African political innovation and African spiritual insight. If you are a Christian, this should transform your understanding of Jesus' royal lineage and the kingdom of God he preached. Jesus wasn't just King of the Jews. He was an heir to traditions of divine rulership that were established through African political leadership. His salvation story connects you to African spiritual wisdom traditions that made Christian theology possible. If you are Muslim, this should expand your appreciation for African contributions to the Abrahamic tradition that Islam continues. Abraham, Moses, David, all operated within political structures that were created or influenced through African rulership. Islamic emphasis on justice and community welfare reflects African spiritual values that were foundational to Middle Eastern religious development. But even if you don't have a specific religious affiliation, this discovery should still be transformative, because it shows that African peoples weren't passive recipients of other cultures' innovations. They were creators of political and spiritual systems that shaped the development of world civilization. Now, here's a reflection that might be more challenging. If you're white and this information challenges your assumptions about cultural development, how are you going to respond? With defensive denial that protects comfortable narratives, or with humble curiosity that opens you up to learning from historical evidence even when it's inconvenient? Porque resistir para esa evidence apenas porque it doesn't fit preconceived notions about African capabilities is formed de racism que perpetuates historical injustices. But acknowledging evidence and allowing it para transform your understanding a step toward racial healing que our world desperately needs. And if you're African or of African descent, how are you going to integrate that knowledge into your identity and your actions in the world? Discovering that your ancestors created Israel should inspire enormous pride, but also enormous responsibility. Pride because African political genius made possible the continuation of spiritual traditions that shaped world civilization. Responsibility because inheritance comes with the obligation to continue exemplifying the justice, wisdom, and inclusive leadership that African Kushite rulers demonstrated. But deeper question que applies para everyone. See truth about African role in creating Israel foi systematically suppressed para over 2 millennia. What outras truths about African achievements have been hidden from você? How many other African contributions para world civilization have been deliberately obscured para maintain narratives que justify contemporary inequalities? Isso should make você deeply suspicious de any historical narratives que consistently minimize African achievements, while maximizing European contributions. Should make você question educational systems que taught você so much about Greek and Roman innovations, mas almost nothing about African innovations que predated e influenced European development. It should inspire você para seek out African perspectives em áreas onde você only heard European interpretations. African scholars, African historians, African spiritual teachers, all podem offer insights que were excluded from your education specifically porque those insights might challenge racial hierarchies que still structure our world. But there's a personal spiritual dimension that might be most challenging to confront. If you've been practicing forms of spirituality that ultimately derive from African innovations, but were taught to you without acknowledgement of African sources, how are you going to honor those sources going forward? Some people resolve essa tension através cultural appropriation, using African spiritual practices while ignoring African people's contemporary struggles. Others resolve it através abandonment, rejecting valuable spiritual practices because they feel guilty about their origins. Mas third option, a integration com justice. Acknowledging African sources de spiritual practices, você find valuable. Educating yourself about African spiritual traditions and their original contexts, and finding ways para support contemporary African communities que are maintaining those traditions, despite ongoing marginalization. And this brings us to the question of action. Knowing what you now know about African contributions to the creation of Israel, how will you live differently? How will you use this knowledge to challenge racism when you encounter it? How will you support African peoples who still face discrimination despite their ancestors' foundational contributions to world civilization? Because receiving knowledge creates obligation. Knowledge about injustice que você don't act upon becomes complicity come that injustice. Discovering que African achievements have been systematically suppressed creates responsibility para você para work toward correcting those historical distortions. But perhaps most important reflection concerns hope. Because discovering que African kingdoms created Israel através inclusive political structures que integrated diverse populations shows que racial cooperation and not only possible, mas has historical precedent para producing extraordinary civilizational achievements. Current conflicts in Middle East, contemporary racial tensions in various countries, ongoing struggles para justice and equality, all draw inspiration from evidence que African political innovation created lasting solutions para problems de diversity, unity, and shared governance que we still struggle come today. African Kushite rulers demonstrated que different ethnic groups could maintain their distinct identities while collaborating under unified political vision, guided through spiritual principles de justice and collective welfare. Els created models para inclusive governance que could inform contemporary approaches para multiracial democracy. Question A. Will você allow rediscovery de African political wisdom para inspire hope para possibilities que currently seem impossible? Will você see evidence de African achievements como foundation para building more just future rather than just interesting information about distant past? Because ultimately, this knowledge is only valuable if it transforms how you live, how you relate to people from different backgrounds, and how you work for justice in your own community and globally. African Kushite rulers created Israel não porque they were superior para other peoples, mas porque they understood principles about inclusive leadership, social justice, and spiritual responsibility que enabled them para build lasting institutions que served collective good rather than narrow interests. The question for you is, will you embody those same principles in your own life and work? Will you become a person who creates inclusive communities, fights for justice, and takes spiritual responsibility for the well-being of all people? Or will you treat this discovery as fascinating but irrelevant to your daily choices? African ancestors who created Israel are waiting para see what you'll create. Quando você understand que their legacy are not ethnic pride, mas universal principles de justice, que could heal divisions and create collaboration across all lines de difference. Comment, transformed. If you're ready to let this knowledge change not just your understanding but your actions, or integrating, if you're still processing what this means for your life and identity, now we come to the crucial moment. How will you incorporate this revolutionary discovery about the Kushite kings who created Israel into your concrete decisions, your relationships, and your way of viewing contemporary conflicts? Because if these revelations don't transform how you live and act in the world, they were merely fascinating intellectual entertainment. Let's start with something immediate and transformative. How will you respond when you hear discussions about conflict in the Middle East? Now you have historical knowledge that can transform these conversations. When people argue that certain groups have an exclusive historical claim to Middle Eastern territories, you can share evidence that Israel was created through cooperation between African and Semitic peoples. Practical application. Educate yourself deeply enough sobre Kushite history. Que você can speak knowledgeably quando opportunities arise. Read African historians. Study archaeological evidence. Understand enough detail que você can contribute substantive historical perspective para political discussions que are typically dominated através contemporary grievances without historical context. Must seja careful about timing and approach. Don't use essa information para minimize anyone's contemporary suffering ou para suggest que historical precedent automatically resolves current conflicts. Use it para expand possibilities para solutions through demonstrating que cooperation between different ethnic groups has successful precedent in same region. Let's move on to educational applications. If you have children or work in education, how will you ensure that the next generation learns accurate history rather than sanitized versions that erase African contributions? This means actively seeking curricula that include African perspectives, supporting African educators, and challenging textbooks that perpetuate historical distortions. Specific action, audit books, movies, educational materials que your children consume. Are African achievements presented accurately and thoroughly? Or are they mentioned apenas peripherally while European Middle Eastern contributions are emphasized? Replace or supplement materials que perpetuate bias. E se você é religious, Jewish, Christian ou Muslim, como essa discovery gonna inform your spiritual practice e religious education? Understanding que African political innovation made your religious tradition possible should deepen appreciation para African spiritual wisdom while enriching your own spiritual development. Religious application. Research African spiritual traditions que influence development to your faith. Ethiopian Judaism, Egyptian Christianity, Sudanese Islam, all preserve elements que were foundational para broader religious development. Learn from contemporary African religious leaders who maintain connections para ancestral wisdom. Must also support African religious communities that face marginalization or resource limitations. Ethiopian Orthodox churches, African indigenous religious practitioners, Kushite cultural preservation societies, all could benefit from partnerships with established religious institutions who acknowledge their historical debt para African innovations. For professional applications, if you work in fields related to history, archaeology, religious studies, or international relations, how will you use your platform to accurately record historical events? This means citing African scholars, promoting African research, and challenging colleagues when they perpetuate narratives that minimize African achievements. Academic application. Quando você see papers, books, ou media presentations que discuss ancient Middle East without acknowledging African contributions, write responses, request corrections, or create alternative content que provides more accurate historical context. E financial applications são crucial applications. How are SUA money choices going to reflect SUA values about honoring African contributions para world civilization? ESO might mean supporting African-owned businesses, African educational institutions, or African cultural preservation projects. Economic justice application. Prioritize purchases to businesses owned através people de African descent. Invest in African development projects rather than apenas supporting European or American organizations que work in Africa. Ensure que African communities benefit directly from economic activities rather than being apenas recipients de charity. Vamos para media consumption. How you gonna consciously seek African perspectives in news, entertainment, and educational content? Most media ainda presents Middle Eastern conflicts, African politics, and religious history através European or American perspectives. Actively search para African voices que offer different viewpoints. Media literacy application. Follow African news sources, African historians, African political analysts. Support African filmmakers, musicians, e-writers que tell stories from African perspectives. Share content who accurately represents African achievements rather than perpetuating stereotypes. Must perhaps most important application concerns relationships. Como essa knowledge gonna transform how você interact with African peoples or people de African descent? Understanding que African political innovation created foundations para Western religious traditions should inspire deep respect para contemporary African wisdom and leadership. Relationship application. Examine your assumptions when you meet people of African descent. Do you assume they need your help? Or do you recognize that they come from traditions of innovation and leadership that created foundational civilizational achievements? Do you listen to their insights as potential wisdom? Or do you dismiss them through unconscious bias? E political applications, some critical. How are SUA voting choices gonna reflect understanding que African peoples have been foundational contributors para world civilization, but continue para face systematic marginalization? Support candidates and policies que address both historical injustices and contemporary inequalities. Political action. Vote para representatives que acknowledge historical African contributions and support policies que benefit African communities globally. Support reparations initiatives que recognize historical theft de African resources and labor. Advocate para foreign policies que respect African sovereignty rather than treating African nations como charity cases. Community organizing applications. Use historical knowledge para build coalitions between different ethnic communities baseadas in recognition de shared heritage rather than artificial divisions. African Kushite rulers created Israel através inclusive political structures. Follow that model através creating inclusive community organizations. Build relationships between African communities and Jewish communities based on shared historical connections. Support interfaith initiatives que acknowledge African heritage de Abrahamic traditions. Create educational programs que teach accurate history about cooperation between different ethnic groups. Para creative expression, como você gonna use art, writing, music, or other outlets para educate people about suppressed African history while honoring African cultural traditions appropriately. Create content que corrects historical narratives without appropriating cultural elements que aren't yours para use. Creative application, support African artists que work with historical themes. Collaborate respectfully com African cultural practitioners quando appropriate. Use a creative platform para amplify African voices rather than speaking para African peoples. Daily spiritual practice applications. If you incorporate African-influenced spiritual elements into your personal practice, sempre acknowledge sources y find ways para give back para communities que preserve those traditions through enormous difficulties. Spiritual practice application. Create daily moments de gratitude para African spiritual innovations que inform your religious tradition. Support preservation de African spiritual practices que are threatened a través modernization or cultural suppression. Learn from African spiritual teachers who maintain authentic connections para ancestral wisdom. Final application concerns persistence and commitment. How will you maintain these practices when they become inconvenient? When you face resistance from others? When enthusiasm fades? And when commitment needs to be sustained through discipline? Answer building sustainable practices que conecte você daily para dignity y achievements de African heritage que shaped world civilization. Creating routines que reminder você regularly de historical truth rather than comfortable fiction. Finding community com others que share commitment para justice-based and accurate history. Describe a specific and concrete application that you commit to implementing starting this week. Be specific, be realistic, but be bold in your commitment to honoring African heritage while working for contemporary justice. We have reached the end of this absolutely earth-shattering revelation that exposed one of the greatest historical erasure operations ever carried out. If you've watched this far, you've demonstrated extraordinary courage in questioning fundamental narratives about Middle Eastern history, wisdom in seeking truth even when it threatens established religious and political assumptions, and openness in allowing historical evidence to transform your understanding of contemporary conflicts. But watching isn't enough. Knowledge without action is merely intellectual entertainment. The question now is, what will you do with what you've discovered about Israel's African creation? First, si ese content revolutionized your understanding de Middle Eastern history. Si it opened your eyes para possibility de peace a través historical accuracy. Si it connected você com suppressed truth about African achievements. Hit that like button. Not just para algorithm, mas as declaration que você value historical truth sobre convenient fiction, cooperation sobre artificial division, justice sobre racial supremacy. Second, subscribe and hit the notification bell because this conversation is absolutely crucial for our contemporary world. We've only just begun to uncover African achievements that have been systematically erased from history, and you don't want to miss discoveries that could transform how we approach current conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, and globally. But most importantly, leave a comment telling me exactly how this revelation about African-created Israel will change how you live, how you vote, how you educate others, and how you build relationships across ethnic boundaries. Are you going to share this history with family and friends? Are you going to challenge historical distortions when you encounter them? Are you going to support African communities that preserve connections to this ancient wisdom? Be bold, be specific, be committed para transformation. Because sua public declaration in comments isn't just para me, it's sua commitment para honoring African achievements que were nearly erased, para supporting contemporary African peoples who face marginalization despite their ancestors' foundational contributions para world civilization. E se você knows someone que needs para discover essa suppressed history, especially people involved in Middle Eastern politics, religious education, or anyone que cares about racial justice, share this video com them. Not para create division, mas para create possibility de healing a través historical accuracy. Not para diminish anyone's heritage, mas para expand recognition de multiple people's contributions para our shared civilization. Remember, every breakthrough in human consciousness starts com individuals que have courage para acknowledge uncomfortable truths. e act baseadas em those truths despite resistance from established powers. Você have opportunity para be one to those people que helps humanity move beyond mythological grievances para historical cooperation. Truth about African creation de Israel isn't meant para stay hidden in your individual knowledge. It's meant para spread, para educate, para transform communities through your willingness, para share it responsibly, para honor it actively, para build upon it constructively. So I ask você one final time, will você honor legacy de African Cushite rulers through building inclusive communities que embody justice principles they demonstrated? Will você allow rediscovery de African achievements para inspire hope para contemporary cooperation que currently seems impossible? Will você help others discover historical foundations para peace que have been buried under centuries de distortion? The answers you give to those questions will determine not just your own growth, but your contribution to healing ancient wounds through recovering ancient wisdom. Based on your persistence throughout this entire revelation, based on your willingness to confront everything you thought you knew about sacred history, I believe your answer will be a powerful commitment to transformation. Welcome para truth. Welcome para justice. Welcome para honoring African wisdom que created foundations para peace. African Cushite rulers created Israel, através demonstrating que different peoples can build great civilizations together. Agora it's your turn para continue their legacy, através creating cooperation in your own time e place. Go build world que honors African achievements, através embodying African principles de inclusive leadership, social justice, e spiritual responsibility.